Let's get started. It's been a little while since we've had one of our sessions. So welcome everyone, or welcome back to Labels and Legacies, Anticipating Adjustments with Atif and some very special guests. This is a series of monthly free panel sessions from Diversity and Ability, where our CEO, Atif Choudhury, will be joined by expert speakers. And together they'll dive into a thought-provoking discussion on how adjustments are seen and how they're put into practice, and how we might want to rethink them as well. And today we are discussing physical adjustments and the part that they play in shaping inclusive spaces. So I'm really delighted to introduce our two panelists for today. Firstly, as always, we have Atif, who is our chair. He is the CEO and co-founder of Diversity and Ability. He's an award-winning social entrepreneur with a background in economic justice and disability inclusion. As well as DNA, Atif also co-founded Zaytoun CIC, which is a fair trade foods company supporting families and farmers in Palestine. And he's also an advisor to the World Health Organization Rapid Assistive Technologies Board and a trustee for Disability Rights UK. And today we'd love to extend a warm welcome to our panelist, Annette Cmela. Annette is Chief Brand Officer at Hidden Disabilities Sunflower. She leads the company's global marketing strategy and brand recognition. Annette is dedicated to advancing the company's mission of improving accessibility for individuals with non-apparent disabilities, conditions, and chronic illnesses. Annette is passionate about creating a world where everyone can participate and contribute fully without facing social, virtual, or environmental barriers. And finally, we're Diversity and Ability, and we're an award-winning social enterprise led by and for disabled people. We advocate for social change, equity, and inclusion on the macro and micro scale, delivering training and consultancy on intersectional disability inclusion across the globe. And just a final note before we start, that we are recording this session. Only the panelists will be visible in that recording, and we'll be able to send that over to anyone who wants after the session as well. So I'm now going to hand over to Atif to begin the discussions.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Ellie said, it's been a while since we've done these, and we all wanted to wait after the summer, just really to sort of kickstart a new series around the themes around inclusion, as DNA always talks about, participation, because that belongs to all of us, and see how we can get the conversations that of so many pioneering things that are happening both locally and globally. And so I'm really honoured, you know, and I've got to meet Annette in a kind of over a sort of randomly at a breakfast table when I reached out and said hello, as I was trying to clumsily find my way to the toast counter, and then we got just chatting, and we were already speaking at the same conference separately, but and I'm so enamored by the work and the spirit of Annette. I just want to say that as well. I don't make you blush too much, Annette. I was just so enamored by the generosity in your spirit that I thought, okay, I really made a new friend today, and I wanted to see and hear more about the work that you do, and we just carried on from there.
But I loved our first meeting, and I remember because I think I was trying to get coffee and the coffee machine wasn't working properly, and then I started talking to you, and the conversation just flowed, and it was a great conversation around belonging and participation and inclusion, and then we've met a few times since, and just love the conversations that we have.
Totally. No, thank you. And I guess I can randomly do those sort of things over breakfast with complete strangers, but it's also nice when it's met in such a way. So I'm going to say that to all of you in the audience that's listening today, and I hope I get to meet all of you, and I'm sure Annette will do. I hope we get to meet all of you in person, and you can have these just sincere moments, really. You know, I struggle with small talk as somebody who did sort of struggle with small talk. I still do it, to be fair, but I really enjoy conversations that have sincerity with just complete strangers. Good things happen. All right, so we're going to go on a bit of a discussion, really. As I said, so Annette, as Ellie's presented, and I hope Annette will talk more about it as well, and I'm sure Annette will, about the sunflower itself, the hidden disability, what it means, what it's doing in the world, why it really matters so much. And I'm really chuffed just to see it grow. It excites me when I just walk past somebody, or I travel around the world and I get to see it, not just in the airport I'm leaving from, but the airport I'm going to. You know, that blows my mind. You know, it really excites me that we can make everyday belonging just something that we do around here. You know, it's not just about what happens in the UK, but it's also what we do wherever we go. You know,
and just drawing on from our previous conversation about meeting, what's really interesting about the sunflower and what sits quite strongly at the core of it is the individuals. So it started from a conversation at Gatwick Airport. So two people started talking about the fact, you know, they were supporting people with visible disabilities through the airport, and they raised the question is how do, you know, there's loads of people coming through the airport, how do we support them? And it's just really interesting from a, you know, single conversation in 2016 that it's evolved organically since then from, you know, the power of individuals who are part of this. And it's really sort of been an organic growth all the way through. So back to our conversation over breakfast, this was a conversation that started elsewhere, and it was just two people chatting. And from that, everything's just grown. So I find that fascinating.
Brilliant.
There's a real synergy in them.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is great. I'm going to touch on a few questions. I've got some questions for Annette as we go through this, but also those of you who are listening today as well, have some questions for yourselves as well in the back of your mind, you know, of the changes that you've seen. Some of you, if you're closer to my age, I'm 50 now, you would have recognized that mental health, for example, is one of the, it's recognized as the biggest disability in the world, yeah, mental health loss. But we've, over the 25, 30 years, only really normalized the conversation about it. And I would say actually probably 30 years is probably too long. I would say it's actually probably only 20 to 25 years. But there was a time that mental health was about, which is still deeply steeped in stigma. But mental health conversation was about if you've been statemented, whether you've been institutionalized, whether you have a diagnosis for bipolar or schizophrenia, as it was said in those days. Now we recognize that mental health is part of everyday conversation, and that there can be no true health agenda in this country or anywhere without a mental health agenda. So the stigma and the attitudes have changed. They've come a long way. There's more work to do, and there's much more participation to build on. But there's been changes. And to think about, so when you listen to Annette speaking, or myself, especially Annette, think about the changes that you've seen that you can take stock of, that gives you hope and celebration and moments to pause. Think about the good work where your solidarity and your action needs to go. And just think about something just as wonderful as everyday belonging, just in the picture of a sunflower that says, I recognize I need to pause. That person has something. I don't know what it is, and I don't need to know it, but I need to know that I can pause, take my time, and have a human moment with somebody that just needs me to, without exhausting themselves. So I hope that is something that we all take away from today. I actually got on the bus today, as I often do, and sometimes I cycle, but I got on the bus today, and I saw on my bus just a sign. It said, priority seating. I know, but that's common enough. But it said it's everyone's journey. Not all disabilities are visible, and it just was a nice moment to sort of think about: would I have seen that 10 years ago? Even not all disabilities are visible. I don't think so, do you know? And so DNA does a lot of work with organizations like TfL. We work a lot on their equity in motion. And it's a big piece of project, you know? But I really wanted to say that to you all and get into these questions of, it's everyone's journey, you know, metaphorically as well as physically. And I think, Annette, you and the Sunflower team have done so much to make that the case, honestly.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start with question one, or they're not really numbered, I suppose, they're just questions. I'm going to read it out to you. Is, from your perspective, Annette, you're thinking about the work you've done in 2016 and even before that. And I suppose thinking about what I've just shared about how I've noticed things over, 10, 20 years. What physical changes have you seen that really helped make a space more inclusive?
So really, for me, the biggest change is the sunflower itself. It started, and I was looking at the marketing that we were doing back then over the last month, and the marketing's changed a lot. So at that time, we had to explain what a non-visible disability is. So people just, the awareness around conditions or chronic illnesses or disabilities that weren't immediately apparent, that the understanding around that didn't exist. And so we had to work very hard to explain what they are in order to be able to explain what the sunflower is. And then today, there's much more of an understanding of what these are. You know, people know that, or there's more awareness that they exist, and there's some conditions or disabilities or chronic illnesses that people can't see, but they extend beyond what, mental health is now included, cognitive, neurodevelopmental, rare diseases. And even further than that, people are starting to understand that they can be situational. So if you've got a nut allergy, that does disable you from taking part in a particular situation. They can be temporary, so they include injuries or operations like hip operations. And of course, they can be permanent. So that understanding around what the sunflower helps people to indicate that there's something about them that can't be seen, and therefore they have some access needs, wasn't there when we first started. It was there in a very small way. So it's been an interesting, from a marketing perspective, or building a brand, it's very interesting to see that conversation change. Globally, it's different. So the UK, we're further ahead, but in other countries, we have to, we get advice locally in terms of how disability is viewed and what we need to do to be able to pull that conversation forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much work to do. I mean, it is such a, 2016, crikey, it's not long, really. It's been 8 years, really. So much. I mean, there is spaces and work to be done. And I'm going to just sort of touch on it, how you delicately and rightly said it, that these are situational. Yeah, for DNA and our team, we talk about this in terms of barriers, The labels, they're sometimes very hard to get. This is why this podcast is called Labels and Legacies, because labels can be liberating, but not everyone is safe with one. Not everyone wants to wear one. And some people are exhausted having to re-say them over again. But at the same time, they can support people's understanding, because we need to deal with shame and taboos and cultural imbalances that we've just inherited. And I think this goes a long way to it. So in the social model, we'd be looking at this and saying, what's the situation? And I think that the work that Sunflower is doing and that Diversity and Ability is doing, and the pioneering work that organizations like Disability Rights UK and others, and really frontline work around how we grow to understand that our conversation, just like mental health, will mature to a direction to understand what is, and ask, what is a disabling situation? And perhaps it won't be about people with disabilities, but rather it'll be about disablement, and the barriers we face, rather than the labels we have to wear.
Yes, and the sunflower plays into that really well, in the sense that where we work with organizations and we train them. So when an organization comes on board, we train them to recognize the sunflower and understand what it looks like. So it's a green background with a yellow sunflower. We then also get them to expand their lens around what a non-visible condition, disability, or chronic illness is. And then when we talk to them about what they should do when they see someone wearing the sunflower, it's about getting advice from that person about what they need in that particular moment to be able to participate. So how can I help you? So it's an offer of help. And it's the person chooses to wear the sunflower, and then the response, in order for them to have confidence and feel independent, that they can participate independently, is when they choose to wear it, they will expect someone to ask, how they can help them. And then that guidance is very much geared around not what can't be seen, but really what is there, what can be done to help them to be able to participate in that particular moment in time. So it takes away the conversation from a disability or a condition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Yeah. And it's just to feel understood, Yeah. Just to feel heard. Yeah, absolutely. God, there's so much in this. I mean, I'm really stoked. I will be, but I'm just sharing where this goes in the world. So I think, again, with drawn anything you want, really, and I suppose your personal passions, what brought you to Sunflower, as well as Sunflower itself, you know. But my question here is generally is that how do you think the way we design inclusive spaces affects people's attitudes and behaviors towards diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
I suppose you have to, if you're looking at design or you're talking about inclusion, it depends how you want to phrase the question. So if you're looking at inclusion and inclusion is more than acknowledging diversity, it's really about sort of looking at people's experience, individual people's experiences and perspectives, and really trying to design it around that. So the design itself can't sit alone without having that conversation around what inclusion means. And very often that doesn't happen. Very often you're looking to sort of remediate what's been there before in terms of a space. And then you need tools like the Sunflower to be able to get that conversation so that someone can feel that they can participate, that they can belong in that space, and then evolve that space in consultation with the people that are within that space. Doesn't really answer your question, but
no, it does. No, absolutely, it does. There is that. Yes. So I mean, Annette, thank you. Yeah, it does. I suppose if I was to touch on it, this is my opinion, and it's not, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. I personally feel the most disabling things on earth are which are, I think, in some ways are bigger than whether they're ramps or there, etc., or staircases and so. It's actually attitudes. It's the attitudes that we have about people we've never met. Quite often because of self-esteem loss, it's the attitudes we have about ourselves. And coupled with that, I think it's socioeconomics. The socioeconomics that take away choices. The poverty that says folks like you don't have jobs in places like that. And so when we think about the workplace, that's where we get to change our socioeconomics. It's where we get to change even our class in some ways. But if we are still facing the barriers where we're hiding things, then we're not changing much in terms of mental health or everyday belonging. In fact, I'm often around conversations where people will say the word belonging as if it's a magic word, and just by saying it, it's instantly appeared. And so it's healthy to sort of look at folks who go, there's work to be done, but for us it means this today. And we use Sunflower because we aren't expected to be psychic. We don't expect our colleagues to be psychic or our leaders to be, but we do care. And this is our way of showing some of that care, as well as enhancing our own understanding and practice.
Yeah, and certainly within the workplace, the Sunflower, there's a lot of the time organisations just don't know where to start, and they won't talk about disability, and they don't know how to talk about disability, and they're terrified of getting it wrong. And so the Sunflower's an easy way. It's a way for organisations to start to talk about disability without being scared of getting it wrong and without focusing purely on disability. They're talking about people can share that they have something that can't be seen and they need to be supported within there. And then very often it moves the conversation to what adjustments can be made so that they can feel recognized, that they can have a voice to impact the business within that organization, and that they feel supported and accommodations can be made. And having that conversation around the barriers that someone feels that they have in the workplace without focusing on their condition is really important and works very well in terms of creating an inclusive environment and also challenging people's mindsets around disability. And then what you find is people start talking about disability openly.
Yeah. That's where we're going here. It's the open conversation about disability, about barriers. And I want to, for the audience listening as well, to pause on this thought as well. That often, and I'm sure those who are listening to this are here because of your own lived experiences or your own passions for a better world. and sometimes for some of you, for the children you're raising for a future world. Those things can intermingle here, and they will do, because that's the work that Sunflower does to address, and so that diversity ability does. But I often do think, going back to the idea of attitudes and how they are not static, hopefully, that they can be progressive, and they're moving to a kind of a conscious arc of connection and consciousness. But we do watch spaces that are not just moving in one chronological direction. Even EDI and anti-racism work had a real thrust to talk about in 2020 and 21 and 22. But that's changing, sadly, in some ways. The urgency is changing despite the situations. The same applies to disability and disablement. We've had the Paralympics. We've had people consciously looking at participation at a global level in a really positive way. But we can sometimes take it for granted that it all moves in one linear way. To know that it all keeps moving in a progressive. Often it does in some ways, one hopes, but actually it doesn't. Sometimes it takes a deep reminder to say it. But I think I'm speaking with an idea of leadership to HR folks as well, that many, and Annette, you sort of touched on it as well, that a lot of folks are afraid of the word disability, and sometimes that has so much power, because some people are afraid to say the wrong thing. And so they don't say anything at all. So this keeps static, embarrassment and lack of inclusion really firmly in place, because we pretend it's not happening. And yet, if we can address from the social model, and Sunflower works with that, DNA works on that, and we will teach it to people. We can address it from the social model, then truly we will understand, look, that barriers are everywhere, and they show up in different lives. Whether we can openly talk about them or not is one conversation, but recognizing that we will all face barriers, that we will all face disabling situations, and we all need the spirit of advocacy and self-advocacy when it's hard to have that conversation. And so, to me, I think that's a big part of everyday belonging, that we recognize it's not about people with disabilities, it's about people, and we will always show up with our differences, And
I think that's really important. And I know when we've had conversations, we've talked about belonging and not belonging and not feeling like you belong. And for me, growing up, it was about cultural differences. So I moved a lot, and I moved from culture to culture as I was younger, and not understanding the cultural references within each country as you grow up, and then within workplaces, is really about being, it's about acknowledging differences and differences in people. And that can be disabling. So when we talk about, I think it's important talking about disability and disablement as in separate contexts, in the sense that everybody can be disabled by experiences that they have, and the differences that sit within them.
Yeah, no, brilliantly. Yeah, absolutely. I want to share something quite human, I suppose, or if I can indulge. When we think about belonging, I have my wife is Lithuanian, and my children, I'm Bengali, and it's intersectionality in its purest or finest, or its most loving form I can experience it. But my children are Lithuanian, and they're from Bangladesh or Bengali. So I'm in Lithuania last summer, and we're by a little wooden house on a lake, and we go there quite often, and it's part of my wife's family's home. And I said, look to my son, and you have to see my son for the audience, but he has long hair, he's a brown skinned kid, and he's 12 years old. And I said to him, does this feel like home to you? And he just, we go every year, but I can stop traffic, literally. So, and kids can follow me, and not in a bad way, I'm just different. And so I asked him, does this feel like home to you? And he looks at me and he says, Paul, goes, yeah. like, and then he goes to me, is it not for you? And it was a really emotional moment. I really thought, wow, it doesn't have to have an answer. What matters is his world. It is, and that's it's everyday belonging, right? It's just, we just create a space and other people can reclaim it, And I just think you do that. You do that in everything that you do. The sunflower does that. Good.
And it just allows people to belong within spaces. So I don't think belonging in the same way that that we spoke about having, situational belonging is situational as well. So you can feel that you belong to your family. So I always felt like I belonged to my family, but maybe not to the country that I was living in or the environment. So I think that's applicable to the sunflower in the sense that you're going to use it in situations where you need it and you feel that you don't belong, or you feel that you need that confidence to be able to participate. And so that's quite important for individuals, because you have the choice, particularly with a sunflower, you have the choice of when you want to use it and which situation you want to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember in our early conversations of being a kind of mutually, we're both kind of diaspora. We sort of move around a lot. We don't belong here unless we're allowed to be, and we don't belong there because we're not sure to be, and it goes on. Yeah, but a flower is the perfect analogy. If a flower doesn't grow really well, we don't yell at it. We don't tell it off. We don't tell it to be a better flower. We just change its environment. we move it closer to the sun. We move it away from the sun. We might change the soil. We give it a little bit less water. We give it a little bit more. But one thing we don't do is compare it to another flower and say, why can't you just be more like that one? And we can.
That's a beautiful analogy. Yeah. Like that.
I think if we can do it with flowers, I'm sure we can do it with people. And I suppose that's
100%. Yeah. And it's just having that understanding that removing barriers allows people to really flourish.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to my next question with you, which is, and I suppose this is aimed at those of you who are working in companies, HR, with those responsibilities and the hopes for compliance. But it's also for those of you listening who just want to work in a healthy organization, or you want to be the EDI head to lead that, or you just want a better world for your children. I don't know really what spirit you come into when you're listening to this question, but I'm going to do my best to answer it, which is, and again, I'm touching on the idea that so many folks are afraid of saying the wrong thing. It's not because they're bad folks. It's because we as a society haven't, in a healthy way, prepared ourselves well enough. Although we have the Equalities Act, and it is one of the most progressive acts in the world on disability inclusion, but still we haven't got the attitude shift that takes on the social model. It's still defined through medical model and labels rather than the impact of a barrier, the impact of a disabling situation. So my question is is how can organizations make sure that disabled people are heard when decisions about physical changes are being made?
To ensure that they're part of the decision making and part of the process, of the discovery process in terms of putting those changes forward. So don't put the changes in place and then try and remediate and retrofit it back to someone who has who is disabled. It's really consult with everyone within the organization so that you're making sure that you're including all the differences and all the different aspects that people bring, and then take them as part of the decision-making process. So and that applies across, particularly in a workplace, that applies from, changes, recruitment all the way through to employing someone, to the physical spaces that they're in, the digital spaces that they're in, and then all the way through to developing them throughout their career within your particular organization. So it's that consultation and that open conversation and trying to create a safe environment for people to be able to take part and to be able to, I said it before, to have a voice. So to feel that they can have a voice in terms of the decisions that are made within their organization, particularly around physical spaces. The more that you talk to people and the more that you listen to their stories and find out from them, the more inclusive that environment is going to be.
Absolutely. I often say, it's wonderful. And honestly, I often say, look, there's so much internal intelligence. If shame wasn't there, the amount of money that could be saved by doing two things. One is just asking marginalized people who may or may not be sharing, may or not disclose, but recognizing there are people here, they are disabled, they are here. Whether they tell me or not is a different question. Whether the culture is safe enough to tell that story and kill that shame is a different story. But the work to say, I could go to consultants and you know, DNA is a great lived experience consultancy. Yes, please come to us. But they're also recognizing you have folks in your team desperate to tell you these things as well. And it's how, when that safety is made, the money can be saved. A DNA, it's of course not, and the same with Sunflower, it's not about money per se, but it is about participation and the sustainability of that participation. We use a term here called the anticipatory welcome, you know, and it's sort of touching on what is confined within the Equalities Act. It's actually a duty of care and an anticipatory duty when you're a certain size organization to anticipate that perhaps wheelchair users will want to work here, to not wait till only wheelchair user may apply and then create a hassle point or a stress point, to anticipate that you won't be psychic, but there will be people with barriers, and you have to recognize what your role is in tackling that, rather than them having to do so much exhaustion or emotional labor or even disclosure. Because I strongly feel that disclosure is often about job protection, and all too often job protection is mental health loss in itself. So again, for me, the Sunflower is a way of sharing, not because I have to, but there'll be some realities to that, but also because I want to, because it's okay. You know?
And it's also for when organisations take it, you know, join the Sunflower, they'll be joining because they recognise that they want to get that input and they want to be inclusive. And in terms of sharing information within an organisation, it's important to get the information from the current employees that are in that organisation, because they understand the culture. So they'll have lived within that culture and they will know what the barriers are. Prior to the Sunflower, I worked in banking in the City of London, which is a very male-orientated, at the time was just full of men. I was one of the only women within the department. And you had to understand the culture in order to try and make change, because there's roots through it. So if the organisation isn't ready to change, in order to make change and be able to have a voice to impact the business, you have to understand what the culture is and what the barriers are, because you'll recognise them from your perspective, but then it's important to get everyone's perspective. And a lot of time, it's fear. It's fear of losing your job that you don't put up these, make these suggestions. And so if you can find a way of, if an organisation can find a way to get that intellectual, intelligence to be able to make changes in a safe way, so that people don't feel scared of talking about it, then you will get really interesting and really insightful information. Maybe not something that you can act on immediately, but something that you can certainly bring into other conversations. And it's incumbent on the managers and the people who are there to make the change to take that information forward, and not necessarily be able to make change straight away, but certainly to be able to bring it into discussions on your behalf.
Absolutely. We are so dependent on, and you've said it, the emotional labor, or the exhaustion of somebody in order to, and it can be different. I know, going back to that internal intelligence, that I know in my life, and I can relate to two things you've said. I worked in a bank too. I was hopeless at it. I mean, if there was a way I could meet some of my colleagues and just say sorry, because I mean, that was so bad. I used to dread cashiering, and I'd have queues in the rain. I mean, the queue was so long it'd be outside of the bank, and it would be in the rain. I was just why I did that, or why. But I guess I needed to. It was a situation I was in, and I needed to work. And banks took on 16-year-olds in those days. But it was just not to my strengths at all, But it totally defined how I felt about myself. It totally defined whether I thought I was intelligent. In fact, if anything, it pretty much put a ceiling for years on whether I was convinced I wasn't. And it haunts you. I still think about those things sometimes. Yeah. And and recognizing, okay, dyslexia was there, but I didn't know how to advocate that, even if I suspected it. ADHD wasn't a conversation we had in those days. But certainly, why would you try to? You're already messing up the cash till. You're already having. Why would you then? And yet, when I left, I outsold. I won't go into it too much. I outsold the whole country on something, and it's just because I believed in what they were trying to do. I liked this thing that I was sort of selling, and all I was doing was having a conversation about something, and it led to the chairman of the bank coming to meet me to ask if I would set up a team to do. And of course I wasn't going to. I'd gone to university. There was no looking back for me. But I just look back and I think how funny it is that we couldn't play to strengths even back then, even when it truly mattered, but also something that the bank lost. And so I suppose if I was indulgent on this, and I want to say this to leaders listening now, to recognize that when you reach out to the most marginalized person in the room, I promise two things will happen. One is you reach out to more of the room. Truly you do. But you'll also discover that the most marginalized person you thought you were reaching out to probably wasn't. Or somebody else who dare not tell you. But if you made them feel welcomed, or they saw what you were actually actioning, they may tell you because they want to, not because they have to. And
I think that's really important. It's about creating that safe environment where people feel that they can share. And I think the Sunflower does that beautifully in terms of being able to share something without talking about it. So it's sharing that, potentially today I'm having a bad day, or I need some help. Can you, let's communicate about this, or and just once you start creating an environment that's safe and people feel confident to share that there's something about it, then that's where you have those really interesting discussions where you're starting to open conversations, particularly around disability, when in the case of the Sunflower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I have another question, which I guess is tied to, and I think folks will listen to this and hear it too, that when we think about our strategies on this, often the strategies have been historically on, and even then not very well, on visible disabilities, things we can see. And then we're coming to understand, and DNA does some terrific work with Transport for London on how to make sure those physical differences can be seen and understood. But we also work, and we have done over the last 4 years, on hidden differences. That's sensory changes and sensory overloads. And it may be because of autism, etc. But it may be because of post-traumatic stress. It may be that, or as I often feel in terms of dyslexia, I get a disorientation of left and right and what entrance. I have yet to come out of Bank Station and Old Street Tube Station the right way ever, knowing I go to the same place each time. I've yet to come out the right place. So people have these moments and quite regularly, and it can stress them out. But something the challenge, and I'm going to get to the question. The challenge is that we almost divide because of this historical imbalances of these are priorities and good people's priorities and good people's needs. Are all too often pitted against other people's good people's needs. That we have, okay, well, our priority today is going to be on ramps, which is important. But hidden differences can cost lives as much as the physical ones. And so I guess my question is, when we think about these, and I sometimes think there are silos, really, and I'll try to make that clear, is that when we have silos, we are seeing some people's needs deprioritized over others. And yes, yeah, it's often said we're all on a journey and we've got to get this right. But why wouldn't you have a black, for example, gay wheelchair user? Why wouldn't you have somebody who's a wheelchair user, but also dealing with a sensory impairment or a neurodiverse one? Why wouldn't you, and I think this is really important to say, be a disabled person who's also impacted by mental health loss? But you're never asked about mental health loss because people are talking always about what they can see. So why wouldn't being a blind person have a mental health ramification if you're unsupported or judged every day, or people are messing with your dog when you're running across the road? You know, these things truly matter. And so the sunflower allows, hopefully, people to see something. So my question is, how do you align your approach to physical adjustments and other elements of equity or diversity or inclusion? What do you think? And you don't have to have an exact answer on that, but how would you align? What do you think the good work is ahead of us so that we can all align these understandings that they are tied up?
You have to do it in an intersectional approach. So it's good to, a lot of organizations will have groups, separate groups, and they're very valuable. Within those separate groups, there'll be marginalization because of intersectionality. And so you've got to be conscious of that. But it's also about making sure that all those groups come together to talk about change in and removing barriers in an intersectional way, so that you're not, those conversations go across and look at everyone's identities and everyone's differences. Yeah. So it's having a real understanding of the community that you're working in, I suppose. It's creating a community where identities are recognized, and those identities, recognizing that they do intersect, and looking at making sure that you are consulting with everyone within there, so that everyone has a voice and an impact, so that you're not, doing ramps this week and then next week you're going to do something else. Yeah. It's about recognizing that it's a holistic approach. So it's sort of how this, I think part of the reason the sunflower has grown so organically is that it's recognizing that non-visible disabilities and conditions and chronic illnesses, it's an umbrella for all of them, that we're not just doing one week and then one the next week and moving on. It's about providing a symbol for someone who has something that someone else can't see, and then really talking about, how can we remove barriers, and how, that could be societal, it could be attitudes, it could be physical, and just making sure that you're bringing everyone in to that conversation on, that individual has the power to start that conversation on their behalf, but that individual's multiplied a million times, so that every individual is equally as important as every other individual.
Absolutely. And I really, really, really implore people listening, especially those coming from, not that the UK has got it right, but to think about this in terms of intersectionality, that there will be optics that people are also, that it feels like it's okay to talk about this because LinkedIn is telling us it's okay. Well, that's not enough. It's about recognizing, yes, it is important that we talk about things, even if, and it's hard, especially, but even if LinkedIn is not telling us we should do it, right? Because they are, grief is one of the things that I think we need to find a better way to talk about around the world. But I think the UK could learn a lot more about that from other countries. And likewise, in terms of neurodiversity, which I think the UK is leading, some of the voices around the world, there are other countries to learn from that as well. And it's understanding that sharing. But intersectionality, absolutely. I've said it many times, and forgive me, I'll say it again, but if we do not have an intersectional understanding of the barriers that people are facing, then we just don't have a relevant understanding of the barriers people are facing. What we have is just constantly, as HR leaders or directors, just playing catch up, to something that we feel like we're supposed to do, rather than taking a breath and say, how do we learn from this? How do we have the humility, and we do, to recognize the debt we owe to difference, and how it teaches us and it informs our practice and it builds a better world, not just for those who are often marginalized, but for, as I said earlier, the children that we're raising, or just want to foster a better world for, whether we have children or not, So I'm coming, I guess, to my last question, which I ask all my guests, when we do this. And I suppose it's because, we're dealing with some really real concerns. We're dealing with some real challenges. They're not easy. And with that is the solidarity of recognizing it's just not easy. It's just not easy. But it is sincere. And so I guess when I think about this moment, I like to ask people, what is it that keeps you hopeful? Where do you go, Annette? Or Sunflower, but both. What keeps you hopeful, Annette?
Individuals. Every single time, it's an individual. It's the power of an individual putting on the lanyard and having the confidence to go out, and that keeps me hopeful, because that individual may not have gone out before without the sunflower, may not have felt comfortable. So that there's so many individuals who use the sunflower every day to go out and be independent and be confident in an environment that they may not have necessarily been confident in before, keeps me hopeful, because the power in that is they're starting, they're opening the conversation around the needs that they've got, and therefore around, opening the conversation around disability. So it's raising awareness that there are differences. It's raising awareness that it's okay for me to share that I've got something that's different or that you can't see about me, and for other people to recognize that and then be comfortable to talk about it. And I think we can talk about organizations and large structures, but they're made up of lots of individuals, and it's through those individuals that either have made decisions within companies or make a decision on, as they leave the house and they put the sunflower on, or they put the sunflower on in a particular situation. And all of those together, we will be able to make change. So that keeps me really hopeful. And I really think that it's very important to remember there's so many people in society, and every single one of them can make a change. You don't have to have a huge following. You don't have to, in a socioeconomic context, be incredible. There's very small steps that you can make, but that magnify and amplify if we all do it together.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a critical mass of just people who just care. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say this, that people won't give my experience, and I suppose if I'm sharing that, I guess I've traveled a lot and seen a lot of conflicts in worlds and pain happening to communities that just don't deserve it. But I truly think that most people, if given the chance to care, they just care. That keeps me hopeful. And just, your answer there about individuals, it's our collective responsibility. It's not the responsibility just of HR leaders in our workplace. EDI is often famously and rightly said, it's not the role of HR, it's the role of everybody. And yeah, it's a critical mass of individuals saying, well, what would I want for the world I'm in? What would I want if someone was advocating for my needs? What would I want them to say? And I guess in some ways, and you've done it so well, what would I want them to feel? In this work, yeah. I'm really, we're sort of coming to the end of this, but I'm just so enamored with this time with you, and I knew I would be. But also, I guess it's just exciting to share this conversation with people. There are things in the chat as well, those listening as well and watching. There are, as we've talked as well, and kindly April from the Diversity and Ability team has put some nice things in there, which is there's a link about how to build inclusion through physical spaces and how to put the voices of disabled people at the heart of that process, which is really what Annette said as well. That lived experience is the asset in the room. It is the internal intelligence. It can save you a lot of money if you just make it safe for people to tell you stuff. Also, and it was somebody in my team said it, and I think it was probably Ellie. who introduced us earlier, but I just loved it. I just loved it. She said, and I don't know, forgive me, Ellie, if it's not come from you, but I just thought it did. It said, inclusive recruitment is inclusive retention. You know, it's one of the biggest things we're dealing with in the world, in the workplace at least, is keeping hold of good folks. You know, so this is a challenge about retention. And yeah, and if so, again, organizations listening, if you can say, look, we want to get behind the Sunflower, we want to get behind these conversations, tell us more. Yeah, inclusive recruitment is inclusive retention. Yeah, especially at a time in hybrid working and challenges to the disability employment gap can actually be made. It can actually be made in this lifetime. Okay, so I'm going to hand to Ellie in a moment, but I want to ask everybody listening is please do put in the chat what keeps you hopeful as you listen to this and think about the questions and the conversations and the courage of the sincerity that Annette's given to me. And that's it, really. I'm going to stop and just say thank you. I'm really grateful to everyone listening and back to Ellie. And thank you, Annette.
Yeah, thank you both so much for a conversation that for me felt incredibly validating and quite comforting as well. And I'm sure at least some of those in the chat felt the same. And maybe for others, if it didn't speak to your lived experience, maybe it gave you some insight into the real world impacts of inclusion when it's done right. You spoke about the lanyard and how it keeps you hopeful in it. And I definitely feel that myself, you know, the joy and relief I feel when I see someone else wearing a lanyard when I'm wearing mine, especially if they're an employee in a space, has such a big impact. And you both started the conversation by looking at it from a really high level and discussing what it really means to be disabled, what it means to experience disabling barriers, and how we can remove those barriers. And then that's a key focus of diversity and ability and of the Sunflower scheme, is to recognize that it in part is on us as workplaces to remove those barriers. And we can do that as long as we do that with those with lived experience at the center of that work. So what can you do? So Annette, you know, you said that often we don't know where to start. And I think the most important thing is to know that you don't have to start this alone. So if you think you're ready to think about how you can foster an inclusive space with an intersectional approach led by lived experience, then we're here for you. So you can scan that QR code on the screen now, or just drop your email in the chat if you'd like to find out more about how we can maybe help you. And thank you so much to everyone who has shared in the chat throughout as well. It's really impactful to see your responses. I'm really grateful to everyone for taking on that space so sincerely as well. And remember what Atif finished with, you know, thinking about what keeps you hopeful. You can continue that conversation by sharing that on social media using the hashtag labels and legacies. We'd really love to know what keeps you hopeful. You can also sign up for our next episode now. So scan the QR code on screen to do that. And we will see you for the next episode soon. Thanks again to Atif and Annette. Thanks, everyone.